I'm going to talk today about how I carve a Hardanger fiddle bridge. Now, this is a very individual thing that each Hardanger fiddle maker will do differently. And so this is just one way of many ways. But if you regularly work on violins and you have a Hardanger fiddle come into your shop and you notice the bridge needs some work, you can't just take a violin bridge and adjust it to the Hardanger fiddle. There's a lot of differences, and a regular bridge just doesn't have the right dimensions to make it work. So we'll go ahead and talk about a couple of the different styles, some of the setup things that I do, and some of the processes that I go through. On this particular fiddle, this is the first fiddle that I built, and so this is the first bridge that I carved, and it's worked for the last I guess 5 or 6 years at this point. But yeah, I'm ready to try something new, and I've decided to experiment with a couple different bridge designs, try to find what will work best for this fiddle. The first thing that I will say is about the bridge blank. Now, you can get a Hardanger fiddle bridge blank from Howard Core, for example. It's a Teller brand. I do not recommend those blanks. They're not good quality wood, and they really limit you on what you can do with the bridge design. What I'd recommend, if you're only ever going to cut 1 or 2 bridges, go ahead and you can buy a blank of wood that is for violin bridges, and this is also relevant for Baroque bridges, viola d'amore, anything that won't work with a typical bridge design. This is actually so you can get the bridge blanks from International Violin, and it's just literally just a blank of wood. This is actually from a cello bridge blank, just for I do enough of these that it made sense to buy the cello wood, and then I got resawed it on my bandsaw and so forth, and I ended up getting about 16 violin bridge blanks out of this. So let me grab calipers, just show you the dimensions. Okay, so right now, just over 5, 6, and I'll get that down before I start. About 50 wide and 46 high. That is definitely more than enough meat, so we'll be taking off quite a lot of wood off of this. But that's a decent starting dimension. Just to give an idea of different bridge designs, there's this book that talks about a lot of fiddle makers in Telemark, Norway. You can kind of thumb through this. Here's the page that it's talking about the Olaf G. Helland bridges and some of his designs. Here's a Gunnar Rostad. And then here's just a page of a bunch of different designs of Hardanger bridges. So as you can see, there's plenty of different designs that you can make, and you'll end up coming to your own if you do enough of these. But I'll talk about some of just the important dimensions that are important to consider when carving a bridge. First thing is we're going to figure out where on the fiddle we're going to place the bridge. Now on this one, you can see where the previous bridge has been. The varnish is kind of worn through a little bit. So that gives us a good initial indication. And so I'll go ahead and place that there. And I like to mark, let's see if I can do this. I just get this frog tape. It's like painter's tape, but it's extra thin, and it's got the less sticky adhesive, so it won't pull up your varnish as much. So I just mark that there. The first thing that you'll realize on a Hardanger fiddle is that there's the string length is going to be different. and it's going to be right about 300 millimeters. Here we go. So on this particular one, it looks like I have mine about 306. There's, again, this isn't a very standardized instrument, so everything's going to be slightly different. So if you can see where the previous bridge was, go ahead and put it there. If not, go for around 300 millimeters. You don't have the little nicks in the sound holes that a violin maker would use to indicate where they want the bridge placed. So around 300 is a good starting place. A couple important measurements. We'll go ahead. I just have this little ruler that I bent so that I can get a good measurement on where the bass bar is at. So looks like I'm right about 17. And I'll go ahead and just mark that on here. Apologize, it's hard to work around the camera. Okay, 17. I also want to find the center line. So we'll do this. I'll go from this direction. 37. There's my center line. You know what? Let me grab a pen. These aren't showing up very well. Okay, here we are. So here's the bass bar, center line. The width of my eyes looks like I'm about 40. And I should just note where my sound post is. I may need to adjust it. Oh yeah, that's about 18 in. It's actually just about right. Okay. Okay. So there we have the setup. I'm also going to decide which way I'm going to orient this. Okay. I'm mostly looking at the rays and seeing where I can get nice long straight lines. I think I will make this the back, and this way will be up. And so front, and that way will be up. Okay. Let me go ahead and mark a center line on this. And I'll go ahead and mark it on both front and back. Just in case I lose it at some point. Okay, so there's my center line. And for now, I'm going to also just mark, this is going to be, just for ease of use, where the edges of this come to. So I, and then blank and blank. Okay, real quick, I'm going to get this down to a little bit better. Okay, this is actually 5 I like that. I'm going to take the top down to 4, about 4, just so that I can keep track more intuitively. So just going to scrape this or scribe that. Okay, and then I'm just going to take this over to the belt sander real quick, shave that down. Okay, I have front, back, up, down, all measured. I have the body of the fiddle marked out. Now I'm going to just get an approximate curvature for where the feet will be. So I'll go ahead and just place that there. Take my pencil and scribe the arc. So I'm going to take this over to the spindle sander now. The reason I like the spindle sander, I can lay it flat on the table. The sander comes up 90 degrees, so it really establishes that initial 90 degrees back to body angle. So I'll do that off camera as well. Okay, we're still just working to get this approximate, and so use the spindle sander to fit this approximately to the body. I'm going to go ahead and use this sanding fixture now. Again, we'll do some fine fitting later, but this gets a lot of work done without much effort. So look at it from the side, make sure it's an angle that you like, 90 degrees between the back and the body. Go a little bit lower. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Tighten this. And then here's another important point to mark. So I've got my center line up and down. And I'm mostly eyeballing it to see how perpendicular it is. I guess I could check. Yeah, slight adjustment that way. Too much. Back to where I started. There we go. Let me just make sure it's still where I like it. Yeah. Okay, so here I'll go ahead and mark these perpendicular lines to the center line as well, just as another reference point. It'll be useful later as I'm sketching the design of the bridge. Okay, from here, I'm just going to sand the feet roughly, use some 80 grit, some 320 grit. What I do is I hold the sandpaper right there, just along the edges. We'll do a fine fit later on. Oh, take just my pencil, mark it. This is 8B pencil lead, but any pencil will work. And then here's where it's important. This is why I marked the edges of the blank, is so that I can kind of keep an eye on where the edges are and keep it in the approximate location. So I'll go ahead and get these sanded. Okay, done with the 80. I'll go ahead and remark it and move on to the 320. Okay, there's a little spot right there. I'm not too worried about getting exact. Most of this will end up cutting off, and then the rest of it will fine fit with chalk, or I use pencil. Now that we have the curvature established pretty close, you know, at 80% fit or so, we're going to go ahead and mark the height. Now here's where a Hardanger fiddle bridge will significantly differ from a violin. I'll go ahead and mark the height the way that I normally would. Just hold that, make sure it's centered. Take a straight edge and make a little poke kind of along the G string and along the E string projection, and then hold on, let me make that a little more obvious. Right there, and then I'll just double check this one. Yep. Okay, so a regular violin, you know, full size 5 to 5.5 over the G, 3 to 3.5 over the E. That's what I do, and individual players will be different. Exactly the same thing on a Hardanger fiddle. Regional variations, player variations. There's this is where you'll have to talk to your customer and see exactly what they want. This is my own fiddle, so I like doing 3.5 over the G, 2.5 over the E. So the way that I find that, if I want it to, this is the ratio of the fingerboard to the playing length is usually right around 5/6, and I checked it on this one. Sure enough, it's 5/6. That's true on a violin as well. So if you want, if you want 3.5 over the end of the fingerboard right here, it needs to be the 6/5 ratio right up here. So I take that 3.5 multiplied by 1.2, and then I add a millimeter to that, just because I know I'm going to take some more off from the fitting. I'm going to have a string groove, and so just gives me a little bit of extra space. So 3.5 times 1.2 plus 1 millimeter, 2.5 times 1.2 plus 1 millimeter. This is, again, just kind of getting it approximate. So I'll go ahead and calculate those and then mark those. So here I marked, here's the prick from the straight edge, that 3.5 times the 6/5 ratio plus another millimeter for additional material I'm going to take off. That was 5.2. 2.5 times the 6/5 ratio plus another millimeter is 4.0. So that establishes the string heights. Some people will want them lower, as you know, as low as 2 and 3, maybe up to 3 and 4. Again, just talk to the player. Ideally, before you start, take some measurements or refer to your previous bridge. I'm actually curious. Yeah, so it looks like my G string is going to be a little bit higher than whatever I did on this one, and that's probably good. And my E string is going to be right around the same place. As far as curvature, you can again take the original bridge and just mark that. There's not a standard curvature. The fingerboard is much flatter than a violin, and the bridge curvature is going to be also much flatter. On this one, I'm going to try, I just have this sanding block, since again, there's no standard. I don't have any templates for this, so I'm going to try this. This is a cello fingerboard sanding block. You know, a typical violin, you'll have a 42 millimeter radius. I want it flatter than that, but since again I'm a crossover player, I play primarily violin and then some Hardanger fiddle, and so I like, just for my intuition, I like doing a slightly tighter radius. I also do 92 for a kind of a flatter fiddle. But the best would be if they have an original bridge and they like it, go ahead and use that. For me, I'm just going to mark. Let's see if you can see that. Yeah, put that right where those marks are. Draw that curvature. Perfect. You know, now we have plenty of extra height that we can take off, chisel it off. I'm just going to run this off on the bandsaw real quick. Okay, here's the bridge with the bottom curvature and the top curvature close. The last thing I do before I start finally carving this into more of a bridge shape is just establish kind of my preliminary thicknesses. So the bottom will do 4.5. make a scribe. In the top, I'll do 1.5, and we'll take these down a little bit more, but this kind of just gets the initial. One thing that will be important on the profile, so we'll be going from here up to here. The legs are going to be pretty tall, and I want the legs to stay pretty much full thickness. So I'm going to keep it pretty full, maybe 2/3 of the way before I start coming in. Again, this is all just kind of approximate right now. Okay, here's my blank up to this point, the bottom, the top, and now I have the approximate thickness profile. And, you know, as I'm doing this, this is where I now start drawing out the actual design of the bridge. But I realize I always sand off my reference lines, and I always reestablish them. You can do it either way. You can do it this way, or you can go ahead and draw your bridge before you establish the thicknesses, just so that you keep all of those reference lines. I'm just going to go ahead and redraw those, and then I'll show you how I sketch the bridge. Okay, here's all the reference lines reestablished. The one thing, it's going to be really hard to video this, so I'll do my best to explain it. The first thing that we need to do is establish the understring bridge, the right height for this. Now you could just take the old bridge and sketch approximately where that is. But if you don't have an old bridge, the way that I do that is take the fiddle and holding, yeah, I'm not going to be able to video this. So I'll hold the bridge in place, and then, yep. Well, I will sight down the string channel right here. And at the very end, you'll be able to see kind of the high and the low point of where the channel goes. And so holding this and sighting down that, I mark those two extremes on the bridge front. Okay, here's sighting down the understring channel. Here's kind of the highest extreme and the lowest extreme. Now, fortunately, this all kind of adds up. Here's where they were previously, and so, you know, there's plenty of space on this particular fiddle. Some might be a little bit more constrained. In general, err on the side of going towards the top. That's just a tonal consideration. So I'm going to go ahead and mark on here exactly where they were before, because you know, if they're too high or too low, they'll run into each other, or they'll as they're vibrating, they'll knock against some of the wood here in the channel. So, and that for this one, it looks like it's about 4 millimeters below the top. So that's a good number. That's where my channel's going to go. Okay, so that's the first thing that we've established. The second thing that we want to establish is how wide the feet are and how wide the top is. So the feet, I think we measured earlier, it was 40 between the eyes. Ideally, you'd want to do the width of the feet the same width as between the eyes. Here, I note that my bass bar and equivalently my sound post, if I did that, they would sit just, you know, 0.5 millimeter inside. So I'm actually going to go maybe an extra, maybe I'll go 41.5. So that's a pretty standard violin bridge width, but just be aware, the width between the eyes is the ideal, and then account for the bass bar, and you want a little bit of, you know, at least 1 millimeter of overlap between the edge of the foot and the bass bar. Okay, here's a couple other dimensions that are important, and I'll put something together at the end that shows all of these. Okay, so we established I was going to do 42 between here and here, or 41.5. The width of the feet is going to be 10 millimeters. So then I took my center ruler, established those, and then came 10 millimeters in. The string spacing between the G and E is going to be approximately 36 to 38. And then you want about 6 millimeters on each side of that. And so 36 plus 6 plus 6 is 48. This was 50 total. And so I'm going a little bit narrower just because of that. So I've got a 48, so 24 on each side marked there. Now for the understring channel, some fiddles have 5 strings, understrings, some have 4, some have 2. So this will depend on the number of strings, but you want them spaced 2.5 millimeters between each. So on this 5 string, the middle string is going to go in the middle, and then we'll do every 2.5. So there will be one at 2.5 and one at 5 on either end. So 10 millimeters total for the understring bridge, and then I come out 1 more millimeter on either end. So 12 millimeters total for that. And let me go ahead and draw that in. Okay, those are all of the important dimensions, the width of the feet, the width and string spacing of the strings and the top, and then the width of the understring bridge. The rest is all up to your artistic perspective. So I'll go ahead and zoom in on, clear some things out and just show a time lapse of me deciding. But I always just, I don't have any templates because every bridge is an individual work for an individual fiddle. So, maybe someday after I've done hundreds of these, I'll have my own style that I always do. But, for the most part, the important thing is going to be the playing characteristics, the height and the thicknesses, the quality of the wood, and so forth. I am sure there are lots of tonal adjustments that can be done, but these bridges are so varied and unique, and the sound of each individual fiddle is so unique. I won't pretend to be an expert at all the different shapes that we looked at and pretending to know what each one exactly will do. So at this point, I stay within the bounds of what a traditional fiddle bridge might look like. But yeah, other than that, I guess some of the things to be aware of, there's kind of this oval that goes around the understring bridge. And just between the top arch and the bottom and the sides, keeping those all approximately the same width. And you can see here's the first bridge I ever carved. These are fatter than right up here, and part of that is I ended up taking the action down a little bit. So yeah, from here I'm just going to sketch out. I use the center finder ruler quite a lot just to make sure it looks symmetrical, but I sketch this all freehand. Okay, here's what I've got going on, and yeah, pretty standard design. What I'll do to cut this out then, first I'll take a brad point bit. I've got the centers of these two little holes. I'm going for kind of this style of bridge with the wings here instead of the flat one. So I'll cut these out. I think this is a 3/16 or so. And then the rest is I'll just take my jeweler's saw and I'll put this on a crow's foot, and I just go and saw out right along these lines that I've established. So yeah, I'll come back once that's all cut out. Okay, here we have, at this point, something that I assume it's violin makers that are very familiar with cutting regular bridges. So at this point, I'm not going to show every single step that I do because it should be very familiar, but I'll fit the bridge, put some graphite on, use a scraper and knife to fit the feet till I get good coverage. Once the feet are fit, I will mark, I decided on this one, 36 millimeters. So I'll go 36 E to G, and then divide and walk the dividers, file the string grooves, string it up, and check the string heights until they're 3.5 and 2.5. Put a little bit of graphite in between each one, trim that up. I'll mark the final widths of the feet and the top. I'll probably go for about 4.3 and 1.3 on the top. In general, yeah, I think that's a pretty good profile right there. Maybe take it down a little bit more here, but I want to keep the feet pretty much full thickness here. Take my block plane and get that to the right thickness. Use my scraper to kind of even it all out. At that point, I'll take my knife, carve all these details. One thing looking at this, it looks a little bit heavy down in here, so I think I'll take a little bit more of that off. But yeah, at that point, I like to just wet my finger and get a little bit of water in here to cut the end grain. That makes it a lot easier. At that point, it will all be done. One thing to know, I also carved the understring bridge. I carved kind of a little teepee in there. Yeah, you can see it in this one, that it's not quite the full thickness there. So carve a little channel out there. This is one that my mentor Lindbergh made, and he does the same thing, kind of carve a little bevel in there for the understrings. Then just a piece of carpet with a tiny amount of pigment on it, just to, it looks really white right now, so kind of give a little artificial aging. And then put a parchment over the E string. At that point, it will be ready to string up. I'll go ahead and show you once it's ready to string up, and then I will show one more shot that shows all the final dimensions. Here is the final bridge after all the final fitting of the feet and the grooves and height and all the decorative things. I like having just a little bit of depth to it, but again, all of this is just personal tastes. Has a bridge parchment right there for the E string. If you have a steel A string, that might be a good idea as well. I don't put a parchment on the understrings, even though they're really thin strings. They have a pretty low break angle. So there's kind of a profile. Last thing to mention is the time that I take that helps to determine the price. Probably plan on about an extra hour to cut a Hardanger Fiddle bridge from a blank. As a general rule of thumb, I kind of charge cello prices for a lot of the Hardanger Fiddle things that I do. So I will include in the last frames of this video a PDF that has all of the important dimensions. These are all just guidelines, approximations. There's a lot of liberty and freedom to do what you want, as with most things with the Hardanger Fiddle. But I'll include that as guidelines that you can either screenshot, or I'll include a link to my website that you can download a PDF. All right, hope this helps, and happy fiddling.